Hello there, geeks and gamers. I'm MarcTheCyborg, and today I'd like to talk to you about a game I've been playing which I think you might enjoy. So without further ado. Resident Evil 3 is the third full-blown Resident Evil remake. The original game was remade for the Nintendo GameCube in 2002, and while the game had totally redesigned visuals, some story changes, and added the horrifying Crimson Head zombies, it played very similarly to the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn originals. In 2019, the long-asked-for remake of Resident Evil 2 was finally made, and it was a total overhaul of its source material. It retained the same structure and story of Resident Evil 2, but rather than sticking with the fixed camera angle style that the first remake did, it was rebuilt using the RE engine, introduced the over-the-shoulder perspectives of Resident Evil 4 through 6, and a lot of the user interface elements from Resident Evil 7. It all came together to make what is arguably the best game in the whole series, hitting a great mix of action and horror and adding in a dynamic threat in the form of Mr. X, a tyrant who would roam the halls of the Raccoon City police station, haunting the player like an evil Kool-Aid man.
Oh yeah!
Resident Evil 3 takes the template of the Resident Evil 2 remake and applies it to the final PlayStation 1 game, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Sadly, the result is not nearly as pitch perfect as the Resident Evil 2 remake, as a few corners were cut, likely in an effort to have the game release about a year after Resident Evil 2. However, that is not to say Resident Evil 3 is a bad game which isn't worth your time, I just think these issues may stop it from being worth a full price purchase. The first and most obvious problem the game has is its length. Steam clocked my playthrough, which I did in a single day, at 8 hours, but this includes all deaths, save reloads, and pause time. I did go to do my laundry and left the game running at one point, which certainly skewed the data, as my final clear time was just shy of 5 hours. There is some replay value in the form of a point system which allows you to buy special items on additional playthroughs, but unlike the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, there are no branching pathways in the story this time around. The original Resident Evil 2 had 2 playable characters and 2 campaign scenarios, effectively giving you 4 variant campaigns if you chose to play as Leon or Claire first respectively, and this system did find its way to the remake. The campaign in the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was more linear with only 1 campaign scenario, so the decisions you could make at specific points in the story added variety for players who wanted to go through the game multiple times. This system did not find its way into the Resident Evil 3 remake. So if you don't plan on spending a lot of time in the asymmetrical Project Resistance multiplayer mode, your AAA new release full price game money is going into roughly 5 hours of gameplay on the standard difficulty. Had Resident Evil 3 launched for $30 to $40, this wouldn't be a problem, but unless you're a hardcore Resident Evil fan, it would be really tough for me to recommend that you buy this game right now. However, when the game goes on sale, I strongly recommend playing it because the game which is here is very solid. The stunning RE engine makes every second of the game a visual treat, it runs like a dream, and with a bit of tweaking, the keyboard mouse control feels perfect. The action level has been pumped up a bit over Resident Evil 2, and a few elements have been added to the gameplay in order to facilitate this. The biggest addition is the dodge move, which was also present in the original Resident Evil 3. While playing as Jill, you can tap your dodge button in a direction in order to do a quick step, which can help you deke out enemies or dodge the rockets Nemesis fires, but if you time a dodge perfectly, you get a very satisfying moment of slow motion. While playing as Umbrella mercenary Carlos in his short segments of the game, this move becomes a melee attack, and there's nothing quite as satisfying as Falcon punching a hunter, yeeting it across the room.
Falcon punch!
I have hated the hunter since 1996, those things terrify me. You are also given environmental elements which you can use in combat, such as the classic video game trope with the red exploding barrel, or malfunctioning generators that shock enemies, making them easy targets for the player, or giving you a bit of breathing room if Nemesis is in pursuit. On standard difficulty, the ammo count feels about right, as while I never felt totally strapped for rounds, I also did feel like missing a shot hurt and that I had to make every shot count. A lot of this ammo economy can be exploited by crafty use of the aforementioned barrels and generators, and knowing which monsters are weak to which weapons. You can try to take a hunter down with a pistol, but that could result in you wasting 30 handgun rounds when 3 shotgun shells could do the trick if your aim is true. Just like in the original, throughout the game the bioweapon known as Nemesis hunts you, and whenever he shows up it can drain your ammo fast if you're not careful and clever. Nemesis doesn't have any clear weak points, but he will eventually fall to his knee during pursuits if you put enough ammo into him. But clever players will just find a generator, shock him, and then do their best to run and dodge. Sadly, Nemesis is not nearly as dynamic as Mr. X was in Resident Evil 2. The Nemesis chase sequences are all quite scripted and linear, and you do not appear to ever encounter him at random. Once you realize this, it kills a lot of the tension which comes with feeling like you would walk around any corner to see the leather-clad juggernaut waiting for you. Instead, you're left with around 5 linear chase sequences and about as many boss battles against him. All of them are flashy, fun, and intense, but it also feels much more predictable than the fedora-wearing tyrant of last year's game. The characters have undergone some controversial redesigns, which I sort of minimized in my playthrough by using the classic Jill costume and classic Carlos hair. Mostly because I played the original Resident Evil 3 as a teenager when it launched, and always thought Jill's tube top outfit was super sexy, and I never felt that Carlos would be more believable as an elite Umbrella Corporation mercenary if he looked like a member of the Mars Volta. Good band though. The toned-down Tomb Raider 2013 looking costume which Jill has by default is fine, and there's been some controversy over the skirt being a skort in the classic variant, but I honestly don't get invested in that end of things enough to have a really strong opinion. It may be a bit of pandering to the segment of games journalism who think that games should never contain sexy women, but it doesn't rattle my cage all that much, particularly given the option to use the classic costume, which is at least mostly the way I think of Jill appearing during Resident Evil 3. Skort notwithstanding. Although, if they're going to make the her being dressed in a tube top and skirt is not realistic point, I'm not even going to argue that point by pointing out all the other super unrealistic things in the game. I'm going to destroy the argument with the fact that in the opening scene, Jill is chilling out in her apartment when Nemesis suddenly bursts through the wall and soon after destroys her whole building. She didn't specifically prepare for an evening of survival horror. She was wearing her civilian clothes, and far be it from me to tell a lady she shouldn't be wearing a tube top in the comfort of her own home. With all that being said, when it comes right down to it, I'm sure the question you're asking is, should I play Resident Evil 3? My answer to that is a firm yes, with an even firmer underlined. However, Resident Evil 3 is a very fun linear action horror game, but it is absolutely not worth the sticker price for a new release AAA game, unless you plan on playing a lot of the multiplayer mode, which personally isn't my kind of thing, or you plan on doing several laps through the campaign to earn all the special items. I hope if Capcom continues with the Resident Evil remakes in sequence, they put a bit more effort into Code Veronica, because if they're going to update my beloved Resident Evil 4, they best be bringing their A game, or I'll hunt them down like Mr. X. And trust me, you don't want to be hunted by a cyborg, we are the best at it.